Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, March 1943. Estelle Vogel had spent 22 years working at Riverside Nursery School on Ellsworth Avenue, and in that time, she'd seen just about everything a kindergarten teacher could see. Bruises explained away as playground tumbles, hungry children who only ate when they came to school, fathers who reeked of bootleg whiskey, and mothers who forgot to pick up their kids until well past dark. But what she noticed that March morning made her stop cold in the cloakroom, her hand frozen on the coat hook as she stared at 5-year-old Ellis Whitmore. The boy stood at his cubby removing his jacket, navy blue corduroy with a neatly darned patch at the elbow, the same jacket he'd worn every single day for the past 4 months. Beneath it, the same plaid flannel shirt, the same brown knickers, the same gray wool socks. Every piece was spotless, laundered, pressed, crisp as if it had just come from Marshall Field's window display. Not a wrinkle, not a stain, not a thread out of place. And yet yesterday, Estelle had watched with her own eyes as Ellsworth knocked over an entire glass of cherry cordial during snack time. The red liquid had spread across his shirt from collar to waistband, a vivid crimson stain that Estelle knew from experience would never come out completely. She'd helped the boy change into his spare clothes from his cubby and handed the soiled shirt to his father that evening in a brown paper sack. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm afraid cherry stain's something fierce. You might want to try soaking it in salt water, but I can't make any promises." Lowell Whitmore had nodded curtly, taken the bag without a word, and led his son out into the darkening Pittsburgh evening, their footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. Now it was morning, and Ellsworth stood before her wearing that same plaid shirt, the very same one that yesterday had been soaked through with cherry cordial. Only now it was pristine, perfect, without so much as a hint of pink where the stain had been. Not even the smell of oxidol or rinso. Just clean cotton fabric, as if the stain had never existed. Estelle crouched down beside the boy, her knees creaking. 22 years of squatting to child height had taken their toll. "Ellis, honey, where's your mother? Did she wash your shirt?" The boy raised his eyes to hers. Gray eyes, the color of Lake Erie before a storm, with a strange weariness that didn't belong in a 5-year-old's face. "Mama's at home," he said quietly. "She's always at home." Then he turned back to his cubby, carefully hanging his jacket on the brass hook. Estelle straightened up slowly. In the 4 months since Ellis had joined their morning group, she'd never once laid eyes on his mother. Only the father, Lowell Whitmore, a tall, gaunt man of about 35, with hollow cheeks and dark shadows under his eyes like he hadn't slept properly in years. He brought the boy at exactly 8 o'clock every morning and collected him at exactly 6 o'clock every evening. Never early, never late. Punctual as the Pennsylvania Railroad. But the mother? Estelle flipped through her mental catalog of every parent meeting, every Christmas pageant, every open house they'd held since Ellis started. No, there'd been no mother. Not once. She went to her desk and pulled out Ellis's enrollment card. Under quote 4, it read, quote 5. But this housewife was a ghost. An invisible woman who apparently laundered and pressed with miraculous skill, but never showed her face to another living soul. For the first week after that morning, Estelle watched. She was a methodical woman, not given to jumping to conclusions. 22 years in a kindergarten classroom had taught her to distinguish real trouble from parental eccentricity, genuine danger from harmless oddity. She observed Ellis. The boy was quiet, too quiet. In a classroom of 25 children who hollered and squabbled and wept and laughed, he stood out for his silence. Not because he was cowed or frightened. No, he simply seemed to exist somewhere else. He played with blocks alone, ate his graham crackers alone, slept during rest time turned toward the wall. The other children left him alone. They didn't bully him, but they didn't befriend him either. Ellis moved through their world like a shadow that everyone could see but nobody quite noticed. Estelle checked his clothes. Every day the same. Navy corduroy jacket, plaid flannel shirt, brown knickers, gray wool socks. And every day, everything was immaculate. Laundered, pressed, perfect. On Tuesday, Ellis fell on the playground and scraped both knees through his knickers, leaving dark mud stains on the brown wool. Estelle had seen the damage clearly, ground-in dirt that would take serious scrubbing to remove. On Wednesday, he arrived in the same brown knickers, spotless. On Thursday, during art time, he accidentally smeared red modeling clay all down the sleeve of his flannel shirt. A greasy crimson streak that Estelle knew from experience was nearly impossible to remove from fabric. That evening, she showed Lowell Whitmore. __quote _6__. The man had simply nodded without speaking. On Friday, Ellis arrived in the same shirt. No trace of red clay. Estelle took the sleeve in her hands, held it up to the light filtering through the tall windows. The fabric was intact, clean. Even the weave of the cloth showed no sign of stress or damage. As if the stain had never existed. __quote _7__. Estelle asked Lowell Whitmore that evening, trying to keep her voice light, conversational. The man froze. Only for a second, maybe less, but Estelle caught it. __quote _8__, he said. His voice was even, but something in it rang false, like he was reciting lines from a script he'd memorized. She's home all day. Plenty of time for housework. I'd love to meet her, Estelle smiled. Perhaps she could come to our spring social. We're having mothers in for tea next month. She can't. Lowell Whitmore's eyes slid away from hers. Quote 13, quote 14, quote 15, he echoed. Then he took Ellis by the hand. Quote 16, quote. They left together, father and boy, both thin, both with the same exhausted faces, both dressed in clean, perfectly pressed clothes. Estelle watched them disappear into the March dusk and thought about how, in 22 years, she'd learned to smell trouble. Sometimes it smelled like gin and cigarettes, sometimes like unwashed children and empty cupboards, and sometimes like this, like clean laundry and silence. That weekend, Estelle did something she'd never done before in her career. She looked up the Whitmore's address in the school records, 247 Bouquet Street, a narrow brick row house in Polish Hill, and on Sunday afternoon she walked past it. The house was identical to all the others on the block. 3 stories, red brick darkened by decades of steel mill smoke, narrow windows, concrete stoop. The curtains were drawn. All of them, upstairs and down, pulled tight against the weak March sunlight. Not unusual in itself. Plenty of people kept their curtains closed for privacy or to keep the heat in. But combined with everything else, it made Estelle's skin prickle. She walked past once, then circled the block and came past again. On the second pass, she noticed something. The milk bottles on the stoop. 6 of them, lined up neatly, all empty, all clean. But the cardboard caps hadn't been collected. The milkman would have taken those when he picked up the empties. These caps were still there, stacked in a small pile beside the bottles as if someone had carefully removed them and set them aside. Someone was home. Someone was bringing in the milk, but not leaving the bottles out properly for collection. Estelle stood on the sidewalk across the street, pretending to adjust her hat while she studied the house. No smoke from the chimney, though it was cold enough for a fire. No sound, no movement, no sign of life except those meticulously cleaned milk bottles. She was about to walk away when she saw him. Lowell Whitmore, emerging from the side alley with a cardboard box in his arms. He moved quickly, glancing up and down the street before climbing the front steps. In the brief moment before he disappeared inside, Estelle saw what was in the box. Blocks of ice from the icebox company, wrapped in burlap. The door closed behind him. The curtains didn't move. Estelle walked home slowly, her mind working. A woman who never left the house. Clothes that were impossibly clean. Ice deliveries on a Sunday. Milk brought in but not properly set out for collection. and a small boy with ancient eyes who said his mother was underscore underscore quote underscore 17 underscore underscore. On Monday morning, Estelle pulled Ellis aside during free play. The other children were building block towers and playing house. No one paid attention to the teacher and the quiet boy in the corner. The boy nodded, those gray eyes fixed on hers. Silence. Then, Ellis thought about this carefully, as if calculating. Quote 22, he said finally. Quote 23, 4 months ago. Estelle kept her voice gentle. Quote 24. Quote 25. Quote 26. Quote 27. Ellis looked down at his hands. Estelle's heart was beating too fast. And your mother, does she look at you when you talk to her? Her eyes are open, Ellis said. But Papa says she's resting, that she's very, very sick and needs peace and quiet. Ellis, when you're in the room with your mother, what does it smell like? The boy's face didn't change. Like winter, like when you open the icebox. That evening, Estelle stayed late after all the children had been picked up. She sat at her desk with the classroom door closed and made a telephone call to the Allegheny County Health Department. The woman who answered was brisk, efficient. Health Department, Mrs. Kowalski speaking. This is Estelle Vogel from Riverside Nursery School. I need to report a situation. I believe there's a woman who may be seriously ill and not receiving proper medical care. What are the symptoms? Estelle hesitated. How did you say this? How did you tell a stranger on the telephone what you suspected? The child says his mother has been bedridden for months, that she doesn't speak, doesn't move, lies with her eyes open. The father brings home ice regularly. The house, there's something very wrong. Has anyone seen this woman? A doctor? A neighbor? No one I can find. She never leaves the home, never comes to the door, never appears in any window. Ma'am, with respect, there are plenty of bedridden invalids in this city, especially with this influenza going around. Unless you have evidence of abuse or neglect, the child is 5 years old. Estelle's voice was sharp now. Quote 44. There was a long pause. Then, quote 45. The men from the health department arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. 2 of them, along with a police officer from the precinct. Estelle had asked to be notified, and Mrs. Kowalski had called the school that morning. Quote 46. Estelle told the assistant teacher she was feeling poorly and left at 1:30. She stood across the street from 247 Bouquet Street as the official black Ford pulled up. The 2 health inspectors, both men in dark suits and fedoras, climbed out first, followed by the uniformed officer. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, conferring, looking up at the house with its drawn curtains and silent windows. Then they climbed the steps and knocked. No answer. They knocked again, louder. One of the inspectors called out, underscore underscore quote underscore 47 underscore underscore. Still nothing. The officer tried the doorknob. Locked. He looked at the health inspectors who nodded. The officer took a step back and kicked the door just below the handle. The old lock gave way with a crack, and the door swung inward. They went inside. Estelle waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Then the officer came out onto the stoop, his face ashen, and was sick over the railing into the narrow strip of yard. One of the health inspectors appeared in the doorway, his handkerchief pressed to his nose and mouth, his face the color of old newsprint. He looked around wildly until he spotted Estelle across the street. Quote 48, quote, he called out. Quote 49, quote 50, quote 51, quote 52, quote 53, quote. The man's voice was hollow. Dear God. The other inspector came out, supporting the police officer. Donahue's calling for backup in the coroner. We need to find the husband. Where does he work? Crucible Steel, Estelle said. Second shift. He'll be at the plant now. The inspector who'd been sick straightened up, wiping his mouth. Quote 58, quote 59, quote 60. They arrested Lowell Whitmore at the steel plant, pulled him right off the floor in the middle of his shift, still wearing his work gloves and safety goggles. The foreman said later that Whitmore didn't resist, didn't say a word. Just set down his tools carefully, removed his goggles, and held out his wrists for the handcuffs. The coroner's report, when it came 3 days later, confirmed what the health inspectors had suspected. Vera Whitmore had been dead for approximately 4 months. Cause of death: cerebral aneurysm. She died instantly, likely while preparing dinner. They'd found a pot of half-made soup on the stove, long since dried to a crust. What Lowell Whitmore had done afterward was harder to document in official language. He'd carried her body upstairs to their bedroom, laid her out on the bed in her good Sunday dress, the blue one with the white collar, arranged her hands, combed her hair, and then he'd tried to preserve her. The ice deliveries, 3 times a week, regular as clockwork. He'd surrounded the body with ice, changed it out as it melted, tried to maintain the cold. It had worked, after a fashion. The March cold had helped. But the worst part, the part that made even the hardened coroner's assistants turn away, was what he'd done to his son. Every evening when Lowell came home from the plant, he'd bathe and change into clean clothes. Then he'd go upstairs to the bedroom. He'd sit beside the bed, read to his wife from the newspaper, tell her about his day, ask her opinion on matters great and small, and he'd bring Ellis. Every single evening for 4 months, Lowell had brought his 5-year-old son into that room, made him sit on the wooden chair beside the bed, told him to talk to his mother, to tell her about school, to say goodnight. Ellis had said goodnight to his unresponsive mother every night for 4 months. The newspapers had a field day. Quote 61 screamed the Post-Gazette. Quote 62 declared the press. The Sun-Telegraph ran a photograph of the house with the bedroom windows circled in thick black ink. But Estelle didn't read the papers. She was too busy trying to take care of Ellis. The authorities had placed the boy in emergency foster care while they sorted out what to do. The foster mother, Mrs. Catherine Brennan, was a comfortable woman in her 50s who'd raised 6 children of her own and fostered a dozen more. She called Estelle on the 3rd day. Quote 63, quote 64, quote 65. Estelle went that evening. The Brennan house was in Lawrenceville, a tidy frame cottage with lace curtains and a front porch crowded with potted geraniums. Mrs. Brennan met her at the door. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 66, underscore, underscore. Ellis was exactly where Mrs. Brennan had said, in the wingback chair by the window, his feet not quite touching the floor, staring out at the street. He was wearing new clothes. Someone from the foster care office must have bought them, but he looked wrong in them, like a small actor in an ill-fitting costume. Estelle sat down in the chair beside him. Quote 67. The boy didn't turn his head. I know this is all very confusing, Estelle said quietly, and scary. But Mrs. Brennan is a kind woman. You're safe here. Still nothing. Ellis, honey, you can talk to me. You can tell me what you're feeling. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, still staring out the window, he spoke. Quote 71. Quote 72. Quote 73. How did you answer that? How did you explain to a 5-year-old that his father was in the county jail, that he'd likely be charged with child endangerment at minimum, that the district attorney was still trying to figure out the full extent of what had happened? Your papa made some choices that weren't good, Estelle said carefully. When your mother died, and she did die, Ellis, back in December, your papa should have told someone. He should have let people help him. But he didn't. He tried to handle it all by himself, and that wasn't safe. Not for him, and not for you. Mama's dead. Yes. Not sleeping. Dead. Yes. Ellis turned to look at her then, and the expression on his face was one Estelle would never forget. Not grief, not fear, just a terrible, ancient understanding. "I knew," he said. "I always knew. But Papa said we had to pretend. He said if we pretended hard enough, maybe it wouldn't be true." The trial was brief. Lowell Whitmore pled guilty to all charges: child endangerment, failure to report a death, improper handling of human remains. His lawyer, a young public defender fresh out of Duquesne University Law School, tried to argue diminished capacity, temporary insanity brought on by grief. The prosecutor wasn't buying it. Quote, 82, quote, 83. The prosecutor turned to face the courtroom, though it was sparsely filled. Just a handful of reporters, some social workers, Estelle in the back row. Quote, 84, Lowell Whitmore sat at the defense table, hands folded, head bowed. He'd lost weight since the arrest. His suit hung on him like a scarecrow's clothes. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he stood slowly. Quote, 85, His voice was barely audible. Quote, 86. Quote, 87. The judge asked, his voice hard. Quote, 88. Quote. Lowell's voice broke. "I thought he needed his mother, even if she couldn't answer him, even if she couldn't respond. I thought it was better than nothing." "You were profoundly wrong," the judge said flatly. "I know." Lowell Whitmore looked up then, his eyes finding Estelle in the back of the courtroom. "I know what I did to Ellis. I know I've harmed him in ways I can't undo. But I swear to God, I thought I was doing right by him. I thought I was giving him his mother." The judge sentenced him to 5 years at the Western State Penitentiary in Center County, with the possibility of parole pending psychiatric evaluation. As they led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Lowell Whitmore stopped beside Estelle's row. Quote, 93, quote, he asked. Quote, 94, quote, 95, quote, Estelle said. Quote, 96, quote. Lowell swallowed hard. Then the bailiffs pulled him away, and he was gone. Ellis stayed with the Brennans for 8 months while the court sorted out permanent placement. Lowell's sister in Cleveland offered to take the boy, but she was nearly 60 and in poor health herself. Vera's family wanted nothing to do with, quote, 98. They'd never approved of the marriage to begin with, and this scandal had merely confirmed their worst suspicions. In the end, it was a couple from Squirrel Hill who came forward. Jasper and Pearl Hoffman, he a pharmacist, she a librarian at Carnegie Library. They'd been trying for children for 8 years without success, had applied to foster 2 years prior. The social worker thought they'd be a good match for Ellis. Educated, stable, patient. The Hoffmans met Ellis at the foster home on a Saturday in November. Estelle was there too, at Mrs. Brennan's request. Quote, 99 Pearl Hoffman was a small, neat woman of about 30, with dark hair pinned in victory rolls and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Jasper was taller, quieter, with the gentle manner of someone used to dealing with nervous patients. They sat in the Brennan parlor with Ellis between them on the sofa, not crowding him, just there. Pearl did most of the talking. Quote, 100 . Ellis looked at her, then at Jasper, then at Estelle. He asked. Jasper confirmed. Ellis said, 5 years passed. In May of 1948, Lowell Whitmore was released from Western State Penitentiary after serving his full sentence. The psychiatric evaluation had concluded that while he'd made progress in therapy, the trauma of what he'd done, and what he'd put his son through, would stay with him forever. He wrote to the Hoffmans asking if he could see Ellis. Jasper and Pearl discussed it at length. They consulted with Ellis's therapist, with their minister, with Estelle. Finally, they asked Ellis himself, who was now 10 years old. Pearl asked gently. Ellis thought about it for a long time. Ellis said slowly. Jasper said. In the end, Ellis agreed to one meeting, supervised by a social worker, in a neutral location. They met at a park in East Liberty on a Sunday afternoon in May. Estelle came too, at Ellis's request. I need someone there who understands. Lowell Whitmore looked older than his 40 years. Prison had aged him, or perhaps just reality. He was thinner, grayer, with deep lines around his eyes. He sat on a park bench while Ellis stood a few feet away, Estelle's hand on his shoulder. Lowell said quietly. They looked at each other. A long, strange silence stretched between them. Lowell said finally. Ellis said. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Ellis took a step closer. Lowell's eyes filled with tears. You're wise beyond your years. I had to grow up fast. Ellis's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. Ellis studied his father for a moment. Lowell nodded slowly. Lowell's voice was breaking. You should be happy, Ellis. You should have the childhood I stole from you. If the Hoffmans can give you that, then I have no right to stand in the way. Will you sign the papers? Yes. Yes, I'll sign whatever they need. They stood in silence for another moment. Then Ellis said, I hope you find peace, Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore. Not Papa. Not Father. The distance in that formal address was absolute. I hope you find happiness, Ellis. Real happiness. The kind that doesn't come with shadows. Ellis nodded. Then he turned and walked back to Estelle, took her hand, and didn't look back. Lowell Whitmore signed the adoption papers 3 weeks later. He moved to Johnstown, got a job in a machine shop, lived quietly in a boarding house. He never married again. Once a year, on the anniversary of Vera's death, he visited her grave at Allegheny Cemetery, stood for an hour in silence, then left. He never tried to contact Ellis again. The years rolled forward. Ellis grew up in the Hoffman household, graduated from Taylor Alderdice High School in 1955, went to the University of Pittsburgh on a partial scholarship. He was a serious student, popular enough but never quite comfortable in large groups, more at ease with books than with people. In his sophomore year, he changed his major from engineering to medicine. When Jasper asked why, Ellis said simply, I want to help children who've been hurt. I know what that feels like. Maybe I can use that knowledge for something good. He specialized in pediatrics, with a particular focus on childhood trauma. After finishing his medical degree in 1963 and completing his residency at Children's Hospital in 1967, he took a position in the psychiatric unit, working with children who'd witnessed violence, lost parents, suffered abuse. His colleagues marveled at his patience, his intuition, his ability to reach even the most withdrawn children. Dr. Hoffman has a gift, the head of the department said. He knows exactly what to say, exactly how to listen. These kids trust him in a way they don't trust anyone else. If they'd known his history, they would have understood. Ellis knew what it was like to carry unbearable knowledge. He knew how it felt to be forced into impossible situations. He knew the weight of secrets, the burden of things you couldn't unsee, unknow, unlive. He knew because he'd been there. In 1969, at a medical conference in Philadelphia, Ellis met Frances Caldwell, a psychiatric social worker. She was smart, practical, with a dry sense of humor that could cut through even the heaviest topics. They talked for hours that first evening, ostensibly about treatment approaches and case studies, but really about everything. Books, music, the way the morning light hit the Allegheny River, whether you could ever truly escape your past, or if you just learned to carry it differently. On their third date, Ellis told her about his childhood. All of it. The discovery, the trial, the adoption. He told her because he'd learned that secrets were poison, that hiding the truth only gave it more power. Frances listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're the strongest person I've ever met." I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about not being broken. It's about what you do after. You could have let that destroy you. Instead, you became someone who helps other broken children. That's strength. They married in the summer of 1970. It was a small wedding. The Hoffmans, Francis's family from Philadelphia, a few close friends, and Estelle Vogel, now retired but still sharp-eyed and observant. At the reception, Estelle pulled Ellis aside. Quote, she said. Quote, Ellis replied. Quote, Estelle patted his cheek. Estelle said softly. In 1971, Francis and Ellis had a daughter. They named her Vera Rose Hoffman. Vera after Ellis's mother, Rose after Francis's grandmother. When Jasper and Pearl came to the hospital to meet their granddaughter, Pearl held the tiny bundle and wept. Ellis said quietly. Later, when they were alone, Francis asked, Lowell Whitmore heard about the birth through a mutual acquaintance, one of the few people from the old neighborhood who still knew where he was. He sent a card. Quote 159. Ellis kept the card in his desk drawer but never replied. When Vera Rose was 2 years old, in the autumn of 1973, Lowell Whitmore died. Heart attack, sudden and massive. He was 65. The boarding house landlady found him in his room, slumped over the small table where he took his meals. On the table was a photograph. Lowell and Vera on their wedding day, both young and smiling, the future still unwritten. The landlady contacted the Hoffmans because she'd found their address in Lowell's effects, a single sheet of paper with quote 160 written at the top in careful script. Jasper called Ellis with the news. There was a long silence on the line. Ellis said finally, the funeral was on a cold October morning. Only a handful of people attended. Ellis and Francis, Jasper and Pearl, the landlady Estelle, and 2 men from Lowell's machine shop who'd known him only as a quiet, competent worker who kept to himself. The coffin was closed. Ellis had arranged for Lowell to be buried beside Vera in Allegheny Cemetery. It seemed right, somehow. They'd been separated in the worst possible way, but death could reunite them. As they lowered the casket into the ground, Ellis held little Vera Rose in his arms. The toddler was fascinated by the falling leaves, by the way the wind moved through the cemetery trees, by everything except the solemnity of the moment. Dada, birds, she said, pointing. Yes, sweetheart, birds. Pretty birds. Very pretty. The minister said the final prayer. The mourners began to drift away. Ellis stood by the grave for a moment longer, Francis beside him, their daughter between them. What are you thinking? Francis asked softly. That forgiveness is complicated. I don't know if I've forgiven him. I don't know if I ever will. But I understand him better now. He loved someone so much that losing them broke his mind, and in trying to hold on to her, he destroyed the thing he loved second most, his relationship with his son. That's tragic. It is, but it's also human. We're all capable of loving so badly that it hurts the people around us. The difference is, most of us don't go as far as he did. Do you think he's at peace now? Ellis looked at the 2 gravestones side by side. Lowell Whitmore, 1908 to 1973. Vera Whitmore, 1912 to 1942. I hope so, he said. I hope they both are. Life continued. Ellis's practice grew. He published papers on childhood trauma, spoke at conferences, trained other physicians in his methods. The psychiatric community began to recognize that what happened to children mattered, that trauma didn't just go away if you ignored it, that healing required acknowledgement and care. Ellis was at the forefront of this shift. And everyone who worked with him wondered where his extraordinary empathy came from, how he could be so patient with the most difficult cases, why he never gave up on a child no matter how damaged they seemed. If they'd asked, he would have told them, quote 176 Estelle Vogel lived to see her 80th birthday in 1975. The nursery school threw her a party. She'd been retired for 10 years, but they still considered her part of the family. Children she'd taught were now parents themselves, bringing their own children to Riverside. Ellis came to the party with his family. Vera Rose was 4 now, bright and confident, nothing like the quiet, haunted boy her father had been at that age. Estelle told Ellis. They sat together on the school's front steps, watching Vera Rose play tag with some of the current students. "Do you ever regret it?" Estelle asked. "Making that phone call? Starting the whole chain of events?" Ellis thought about it. "No. You saved me from a situation that would have destroyed me completely. Yes, it was traumatic. The discovery, the publicity, losing my father to prison. But staying in that house, living that lie, that would have been worse. You gave me a chance at a real life." "Did you get one? A real life?" "I don't know if anyone's life is truly normal, but I got a good life. A family I chose and who chose me back. Work that matters. A daughter who'll never have to carry the kind of burden I carried." He smiled. "That's more than normal. That's grace." Estelle reached over and took his hand. Hers was thin now, age-spotted, the skin like tissue paper. But her grip was firm. "I'm glad," she said simply. "I'm glad you made it through." "Me too." Estelle Vogel died in her sleep in 1978 at 83. The funeral was packed. Hundreds of former students, fellow teachers, parents whose children she'd nurtured. Ellis gave the eulogy. Quote, 190, quote, he said to the assembled crowd. Quote, 191. When I was 5 years old, she saw me. She saw that my clothes were too clean, that I was too quiet, that something was wrong. And she didn't look away. She didn't tell herself it was none of her business. She didn't assume someone else would handle it. She looked and she acted, and she saved my life. How many other children did she save? Not always in such dramatic ways, maybe, but by seeing the hungry child and making sure they got lunch, the bruised child and asking the right questions, the lonely child and giving them a friend, by seeing, truly seeing, when it would have been easier to look away. That's Miss Vogel's legacy. Not just the reading and writing and arithmetic, but the witnessing, the caring, the refusal to let children suffer in silence. We should all be so lucky as to have an Estelle Vogel in our lives. Someone who sees us, truly sees us, and acts on what they see. After the service, as people milled around sharing memories, a woman Ellis didn't recognize approached him. Quote, 194, quote, 195, quote, Ellis said. Quote, 196, quote, Margaret continued, quote, 197, quote. Others came forward with similar stories. The boy she'd caught stealing food and gotten into a breakfast program. The girl with the alcoholic mother she'd connected with a church support group. The immigrant family she'd helped navigate the school system when they spoke no English. Ellis listened to story after story and realized Estelle Vogel had been fighting her quiet war for justice for 3 decades. She hadn't just saved him. She'd saved hundreds. And she'd done it not by making grand gestures or seeking recognition, but simply by seeing what was in front of her and doing what needed to be done. That night, Ellis sat at his desk and wrote in his journal, a practice he'd maintained since his therapist had suggested it in childhood. He wrote about Estelle, about the funeral, about all the lives she'd touched. Then he wrote, quote 198 ____. The years accumulated. The 1980s arrived, then the 1990s. Ellis's hair went gray, then white. He retired from active practice in 1995, but continued to teach, to write, to consult on difficult cases. Vera Rose grew up, went to medical school herself, became an emergency room physician. I guess healing is in our blood, she told her father. Both my grandmothers in their own ways, and now us. Both your grandmothers? Ellis asked. Yes. Grandma Pearl, who healed you by giving you a safe home, and Grandma Vera, who who gave you the understanding that made you who you are. I know that's a complicated way to put it, but it's true, isn't it? What happened, what you went through, made you able to help all those children. Ellis thought about this. I spent a long time being angry that I had to learn those lessons, that I couldn't just have a normal childhood like everyone else. But you're right. My experience taught me things that helped me save lives. That knowledge came at a terrible cost, but I chose to make something meaningful from it. So, something meaningful came from something terrible. Yes, Ellis said carefully, but that doesn't make the terrible thing any less terrible. It just means I refuse to let it be the end of my story. In 1990, Ellis received a letter. The return address was Johnstown, the city where Lowell Whitmore had lived out his final years. Inside was a note from a woman named Dorothy Franklin. Dear Dr. Hoffman, it read, You don't know me, but I knew your father, Lowell Whitmore. I was the landlady's daughter, and I remember him from when I was a girl. He was kind to me, let me borrow books from his small collection, never complained when I was noisy. I'm writing because I recently went through my mother's things after she passed. She kept a box of Mr. Whitmore's belongings that were never claimed after he died. Most of it is worthless, old clothes, a few dishes. But there's a journal. I started reading it. I'm sorry, I know that was wrong, and realized it might be something you'd want to see. I'm mailing it to you under separate cover. I hope it brings you some kind of understanding. Mr. Whitmore was a deeply troubled man, but he cared for you. That comes through on every page. The journal arrived 3 days later, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Ellis sat at his desk for a long time before opening it. Frances came in, saw what he was holding, and sat down beside him. Do you want me to leave? She asked. No. Stay. He opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was cramped, careful, the kind of script taught in schools before the Great War. December 8th, 1942, the first entry read. Vera died today. I came home from the plant and found her on the kitchen floor. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing anything. I called her name, but she didn't answer. I called the doctor, but I already knew. My wife is gone, and I don't know how to live in a world without her. Ellis turned the page. The entries continued, daily at first, then sporadically as the weeks wore on. December 15th, 1942. The funeral is tomorrow. I can't do it. I can't put her in the ground. I know I have to. I know Ellis needs closure. But I can't. I called the funeral home and postponed. Told them I was sick. It's not a lie. December 20th, 1942. I moved her to the bedroom. I know this is wrong. I know I'm not thinking clearly. But I need more time. Just a few more days to say goodbye. December 25th, 1942. Christmas. Ellis asked why Mama isn't downstairs. I told him she's too sick to get out of bed. He wanted to give her his present, a drawing he made at school. I took him upstairs. He talked to her, showed her the picture. She didn't answer, of course. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and he's just being kind to me. 5 years old and already kinder than his father. January 3rd, 1943. I'm buying ice now. I know this is madness. I know I can't keep doing this, but every day I tell myself, tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll call the funeral home. Tomorrow I'll do the right thing. But tomorrow comes and I can't. I can't let her go. February 14th, 1943. Valentine's Day. I bought flowers and put them on the bed next to her. Ellis wanted to know why Mama doesn't respond anymore. I told him she's very ill, that we have to be patient. I'm a monster. I know I'm a monster. But I can't stop. March 17th, 1943. They came today. The health department. I knew it would happen eventually. Someone would notice. I'm almost relieved. Almost. They took Vera away. They arrested me. Ellis is with a foster family. I deserve worse than prison. I deserve whatever hell waits for men who do what I've done. The entries stopped there. The rest of the journal was blank pages. Ellis closed the book carefully. His hands were shaking. He knew, he said quietly. All along, he knew it was wrong. He just couldn't stop himself. Does that change how you feel about him? Francis asked. I don't know. It makes it sadder somehow. If he'd been completely delusional, completely divorced from reality, there'd be a kind of absolution in that. But he wasn't. He knew he was hurting me. He knew it was wrong. He just loved her so much that he couldn't let her go, even knowing the cost. What will you do with it? The journal? Ellis thought for a moment. I'll keep it. Not to torture myself, but as evidence. Evidence that people are complicated. That we can know something is wrong and do it anyway. That love can be both beautiful and destructive. That's important for me to remember, in my work and in my life. He put the journal in his desk drawer, next to the card Lowell had sent when Vera Rose was born. He was my father, Ellis said. He did terrible things, and he knew they were terrible. But he was still my father. Both things are true. In 2003, Ellis Hoffman turned 65. He'd been fully retired from practice for 8 years, but still consulted occasionally, still wrote, still taught the occasional seminar. His daughter Vera Rose was married now, living in Boston, working in the emergency room at Mass General. She had a daughter of her own, Lily, age 5, bright and curious and utterly unburdened by the shadows that had haunted her grandfather's childhood. She called every Sunday without fail. The Hoffmans, Jasper and Pearl, had both passed. Jasper in 1998, Pearl in 2001. They'd lived long, good lives and died peacefully, surrounded by family. Ellis had given the eulogy at both funerals, talking about the gift of being chosen, of being loved not because you had to be, but because someone decided you were worth loving. It was October when Ellis decided to visit the cemetery. He went alone, on a crisp afternoon when the leaves were just beginning to turn. He walked through Allegheny Cemetery, past ornate Victorian monuments and simple modern headstones, until he reached the section where his birth parents were buried. 2 matching stones, side by side. Vera Whitmore, 1912 to 1942, beloved wife and mother. Lowell Whitmore, 1908 to 1973, reunited at last. Ellis stood there for a long time, hands in his coat pockets, watching the leaves fall. Quote, 228, quote, he said aloud. Quote, 229, quote. A gust of wind scattered leaves across the graves. Quote, 230, quote. He paused, gathered his thoughts. Quote, 231, quote. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving. I don't know if I've forgiven you. Some days I think I have. Some days I'm sure I haven't. Most days I just carry it. The way you carry an old injury that aches when it rains. A squirrel darted across a nearby path, scolding something invisible. You gave me a strange education, both of you. You taught me about love, the real kind, not the romantic kind they show in pictures. Real love, which is messy and painful and sometimes destructive. Mama, you loved me in the ordinary way mothers love their children, and then you died and couldn't love me anymore. Papa, you loved me enough to want me near you even when you were drowning in grief, but not enough to protect me from what was happening. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 233, underscore, underscore. So maybe that's the epilogue to our story. Not redemption exactly. Not a happy ending. But a useful one. You hurt me, and I took that hurt and made it into something that helps other people. That's not nothing. So the dead know they're remembered, she'd explained. I have a granddaughter now, he told them. Vera Rose named her daughter Lily. She's 5 years old and she laughs like bells ringing. She's growing up in a house where people say what they mean and mean what they say, where there are no terrible secrets, where children are protected, not burdened. That's my victory over what happened. I broke the cycle. I raised my daughter in light instead of shadow, and she's doing the same with hers. The darkness stops with me. He stood there a moment longer, then turned to leave. Goodbye, Mama. Goodbye, Papa. Rest well if you can. Ellis Hoffman died peacefully in his sleep in 2015, at the age of 77. He'd lived a long, productive life, saved hundreds of children, published groundbreaking research, trained 2 generations of pediatricians and psychiatrists, loved his wife, his daughter, his granddaughter, his friends. At his funeral, Vera Rose spoke about her father's resilience, his compassion, his refusal to let his past define his future. My father was a survivor, she said. He survived something that would have destroyed most people. But he didn't just survive, he thrived. He took the worst thing that ever happened to him and transformed it into a life's work helping others. That's his legacy. Not what was done to him, but what he did in response. The children he saved, the families he healed, the knowledge he shared, the love he gave. She paused, fighting tears. She unfolded a piece of paper, her father's precise handwriting covering the page. If you're reading this, I've passed on. I hope my death was peaceful, and I hope I lived long enough to see Lily grow up. But that's not why I'm writing this. I'm writing to thank you all for letting me be part of your lives, for loving me despite my scars, for never treating me like damaged goods, for seeing me as I am, a person who suffered, yes, but also a person who healed, who loved, who tried to leave the world a little better than he found it. To my darling Francis, you were my North Star. You showed me that love could be simple, straightforward, safe. That I didn't have to earn it or fear losing it. You just loved me, and that was enough. To my daughter Vera Rose, you gave me the chance to be the father I never had. Every time I tucked you in, read you a story, every time you chose to hug me or not to, and I respected that choice, every time, I was healing a little more. You saved me as much as I tried to protect you. __quote_245__. To all the children I worked with over the years, I hope I helped. I hope I gave you tools to survive, to heal, to grow. I hope you know that what happened to you wasn't your fault, and that healing is possible, even when it seems impossible. __quote_246__. Rest in peace, all of you. I know I will. That was my father, a man who chose grace over grudges, healing over hatred, hope over despair. The world is better for having had him in it. It runs in the family. No child should be forced to show affection they don't feel, he'd written in one of his papers. No child should be made to participate in rituals that frighten or confuse them. No child should carry burdens too heavy for their shoulders. Our job as adults is to protect children, not to use them to meet our own emotional needs. It seemed obvious now, in 2025, when that paper was being taught in medical schools across the country. But in 1972, when Ellis first published it, it had been revolutionary. Someone had asked him once, in an interview, where that conviction came from. From experience, he'd said simply. I know what it's like to be put in an impossible situation as a child. I know what it's like to have no choice, no voice, no way out. I built my entire career on making sure no other child has to know what that feels like. That was Ellis Hoffman's epitaph, really. Not the words on his headstone, but the children who grew up safer because he'd existed. The families who stayed intact because he'd intervened. The practitioners who learned from his example that trauma wasn't destiny, that healing was possible, that meaning could grow even in the darkest soil. On Ellsworth Avenue in Pittsburgh, Riverside Nursery School still stood. Under new management, with new teachers, but the same mission: to see children, really see them, and to act on what they saw. On the wall in the front office hung a photograph: Estelle Vogel, circa 1940, standing with her morning kindergarten class. 25 children, all smiling, all innocent. And somewhere in that class, though you couldn't tell which one from the photograph, was a child who would grow up to change how America understood trauma, who would save hundreds of other children from the kinds of scars he carried, who would prove that the darkest stories could have meaningful endings if someone was brave enough to see, and caring enough to act, and stubborn enough to believe that love, real love, healthy love, was stronger than death. The photograph hung there still, in 2025, a reminder: pay attention, look closely. One phone call can change a life. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage echo for generations. This is a work of fiction. While inspired by themes of childhood trauma and healing, all characters and events are products of the author's imagination. If you or someone you know is experiencing child endangerment, please contact local authorities or the National Child Abuse Hotline.